All right, greetings, young true believers. So today I want to talk to you about Stephen B. Bright's "Why the United States Will Join the Rest of the World in Abandoning Capital Punishment." So I'm going to begin with a quotation from the ancient ancient Roman philosopher Cicero. Uh, the law applied to its extreme is the greatest injustice, right? And I don't think there's a better example of a law applied to the extreme than in the instance of capital punishment, right? So Bright begins his argument thusly: the United States will inevitably join other industrialized nations in abandoning the death penalty, just as it has abandoned whipping, the stocks, branding, cutting off of appendages, maiming, and other primitive forms of punishment. It remains to be seen how long it will be until the use of the death penalty becomes so infrequent as to be pointless, and it is eventually abandoned. In the meantime, capital punishment is arbitrarily and unfairly imposed, undermines the standing and moral authority of the United States and the community of nations, and diminishes the credibility and legitimacy of the courts within the United States. Um, so Bright published this. He wrote this particular piece it was for an anthology called "Debating the Death Penalty" in 2004. So this is not that old of a work, right? There are currently only two first world or highly industrialized nations, namely the United States and Japan, that still practice the death penalty. Japan doesn't execute people all that often. The United States, unfortunately, does execute at both the state and federal level with some degree of regularity, right? So, the first thing that Bright acknowledges, it might seem intuitively, right? Uh, that is to say, on the face of it, prima facie, if you want to be, technical about it, right, in Latin, uh, an appropriate punishment. Someone harms someone, you take a life, you pay with your life, right? Um, but the reality of capital punishment is something entirely different. Uh, the death penalty, he writes, is a direct descendant of the darkest aspects of American history: slavery, lynching, racial oppression, and perfunctory capital trials known as legal lynchings. And racial discrimination remains a prominent feature of capital punishment. The death penalty is not imposed to avenge every killing and, as some contend, to bring closure to the family of the victim, but is inflicted in less than 1% of all murder cases. Well, less than 1%, right? Of more than 20,000 murders in the United States annually, an average of fewer than 300 are sentenced to death, and only 55 are executed each year. Only 19 states actually carried out executions between 1976, when the United States Supreme Court authorized the resumption of capital punishment after declaring it unconstitutional in 72, and the end of 2002. 86% of those executions were in the South, right? And just two states, Texas and Virginia, carried out 45% of them, right? So what can we discern from this information? The death penalty seems to be unfairly and arbitrarily imposed in certain instances. There's a racial bias in it, but it gets worse than that, right? It gets worse because DNA evidence has shown that at least, he cites a statistic here. Uh, Over 100 people condemned to death in the last 30 years have been exonerated and released after new evidence established their innocence or cast doubt on their guilt that they could not be convicted, right? So we should all be concerned about that. If one innocent person is wrongly executed, then that means we all have blood on our hands because the state executes people in our name. And that should worry you. Uh, Going on with this argument, Bright notes, with respect to the issue of whether or not a capital punishment deters crime, he writes, nor is crime deterred by the executions in fewer than half of the states of an arbitrarily selected 1% of those who commit murders. Let me start that again. Nor is crime deterred by the executions in fewer than half the states of an arbitrarily selected 1% of those who commit murders, many of whom are mentally ill or have limited intellectual functioning. The American South, which has carried out 85% of the nation's executions since 1976, has the highest murder rate of any region of the country. The Northeast, which has the fewest executions by far, only 3 executions between 76 and the end of 02, has the lowest murder rate, right? The United States does not need to keep this relic of the past to show its abhorrence of murder. As previously noted, 99% of the murders in the United States are not punished by death, right? Even at war crimes trials in the Hague, which is the body for the International Criminal Court, the ICC, right? Even there, genocide and other crimes against humanity are not punished with the death penalty. The societies that do not have capital punishment surely abhor murder as much as any other, but they do not find it necessary to engage in killing in order to punish, protect, or slow their abhorrence, or show, their abhorrence with killing. So, what about, say, an objection from, say, a retributist philosopher like Immanuel Kant, right, who was decidedly pro-death penalty, right? Well, Bright tells us, and I agree, capital punishment has no place in a decent society. It places some practices, such as torture, off limits, not because some individuals have not done things so bad that they arguably deserve to be tortured, but because a civilized society simply does not engage in such acts. It can be argued that rapists deserve to be raped, that mutilators deserve to be mutilated. Most societies, however, refrain from responding in this way because the punishment is not only degrading on those to whom it is imposed, but is degrading to the society that engages in the same behavior as the criminals. Think about it. What you're asking someone to do when they torture someone is to set aside their humanity and inflict wanton and excruciating pain for what? The sake of justice? That seems ridiculous, right? You're asking someone to compartmentalize to an extreme degree. Check off this side of your hand, just bracket off this part of your humanity that has empathy and table it and inflict pain, right? We should aspire to be better than that as a society. Going on, Bright notes, some make no effort to suppress their glee when the sentence is carried out, and celebrations occur inside and outside the prison. These celebrations of death reflect the dark side of the human spirit, an arrogant, vengeful, unforgiving, uncaring side that either does not admit the possibility of innocence or redemption, or is willing to kill people despite those possibilities, right? So, in short, gang, there are, as you'll see when you read through the text this week, there are numerous reasons to abandon the death penalty. We've abandoned many an atrocious action, right? If you look at the history of capital punishment from antiquity to now, I mean, the way that we used to execute people was absolutely gruesome. Impaling people on spikes, crucifixions, beheadings, right? Public hangings. Now we recognize that capital punishment is something, if it's going to be carried out, it should be carried out, with as few prying eyes as possible, right? This is a recognition of the wrongness of this action, and ditto that with torture, right? And let me close with this anecdote regarding torture. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but during World War II, when American interrogators wanted to get information from captured SS and Nazi officials, they didn't torture them. As a matter of fact, and this is true, they took one group of Nazis out of Leavenworth Prison in Kansas, drove them to Kansas City, Missouri, and wined and dined them at a steakhouse, and then they told them everything they wanted to know. There are much better ways of getting information and accurate information than torturing people. And there are much better ways for society to show its commitment to justice than murdering people.